What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over dashing in our fighting game tutorial series. So specifically we're going to be covering forward dashing and backward dashing. Not exactly command dashes or anything like that, but your standard, you double tap a key and then you dash, forward or backward. I'm going to have it so we can make it work off of root motion, or an amount we assign in the character, because each character's dash can be different in both the animation and the distance. Even the forward and backward dash. For example, Mutant's backward dash barely gets him anywhere in this case. In fact, it's pretty worthless. I should up that a bit. But I did that to show you the difference. So the forward dash brings you all the way over here. The backward dash brings you back a bit. But we can play different animations, and like I said, we can even use just root motion if we want the animation to dictate our movement during it. So we're either going to be able to do that, or you're going to be able to determine the distance the dash actually brings you. We're going to treat the dash like a command, and basically that's the easiest way I can think of doing it, and the best way. Basically, we can start treating almost everything like commands now, because they are. Even our standard attacks like light punch, or basically light attack, you know, our basic punch, whatever you want to call it, that's even a command. It's just one key. So very soon we'll probably be transferring everything over to be dealt with using commands. We'll wait until we get some input, some buffered input and things like that. But I just wanted to let you know for the future kind of where we're going and how we're going to do this. So today's episode should be pretty easy. They don't all have to be super complicated, but it is important that we cover this. And I figured, what better time than now, since we have the multi inputs in the input buffer supported. So the only thing we have to do is go into our AnimBP and our code for our characters. Let's start by going into the code. And if you haven't watched any episode of this tutorial series, I believe we're on episode 67. We're pretty darn far along. It might even be 68 at this point. So if you have not seen any episode you want to catch up, feel free to click this icon in the top right corner for the entire fighting game playlist. Maybe check it out and see what things you might be interested in learning from it. Otherwise, if you want to watch the whole series, we are going to be using our command buffers and our input buffers. We've done quite a few episodes on them, probably 8 or 9 episodes on them alone. If you'd like to implement dashes using the same technique I am, you may want to figure out how we did that. So I'll leave the first episode of those right here. Alright. Now, let's go into our fighter template character.h, or basically your base fighter character.h. And you can scroll down to where you make your variables. I just made them with my other floats, and I made 2 variables called forward dash distance and backward dash distance. And I put them in the category movement. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to start trying to use this category a little bit better, because we're going to start adding more and more configuration options for our character. So jump distances, or you know, maybe a base damage, or even base health some people use. Different things like that. You can kind of categorize all these things in your character, your base character here, and then change them in the blueprint of your other character, or if you're going multiple code classes, you can change it in the mutant character. We have a lot of options here. So, you know, feel free to use this to make your characters as changeable, as modifiable as you want. Same with, like, you can change the actual character's gravity scale and different things. So I figured, let's have a variable for a forward and backward dash distance. Now, in the constructor of the base character, I do set values. I set them to be 800 and 600, and they're not really going off of anything. I just thought that they were good values to use. So feel free to actually figure out how far you want them to move, and if you want it to be the same forward and backward. But I just wanted to show that they can be different, and this is how I made them different. These will only be used if you don't override them in the character that you're using. So for example, we're using the mutant character. So for the mutant character, in the constructor, I made the forward dash distance 800 and the backward dash distance 400. So the backward is significantly less than the forward. Then as far as adding the commands go, it's like the way I've added every other command, but it's still worth covering. In my constructor, for my character, I have another command that I call forward dash and a command that I call backward dash. I add my inputs, forward forward and backward backward. and then I set has used command to be false. And it's that simple. Alright. Now at this point we can actually go right into our BP and cover some of the logic in the state machine. Now you guys are probably getting tired of seeing the state machine logic over and over again, but I am going to cover it just to be safe. So the way I do all my commands as far as this game goes is I basically will check against the structure of the specific index. So make two new states, add state. I made one called command 7-forward, command 8-backward. The command number doesn't really matter unless you're matching it up with your index, but you can mix and match as much as you want, just as long as you know which one you're trying to access here. Okay, so idle to command 7. So for this one, I do it the same as all the others. Mutant character reference, I grab my list of commands, I get the proper index. Command 7 is index 6, since indices start at 0. And if I have used this command, basically if I have pressed forward, then I'll go ahead and do this result, which means I'll go from idle to command 7. And then same with idle to command 8, I just use index 7 instead. Then, for the transition, the start transition event, I do start attack transition. Since these are a dash, you know, you could make a different event called start dash transition or something, and you can do different logic. Doing start attack transition here won't really hurt anything, because if you want to do combo out of the dash into a different attack, it would be very simple. You would just make a new state off of your command here, off of your dash, and then have the condition to go to that state if they use the specific attack. Was light attack used? Was medium attack used? You know, whatever. So it doesn't really hurt to do start attack transition here unless there's specific logic other than comboing out of it that you want to do. Like maybe you want to have a different state for this, or you want to be able to move through the character during a dash, different things like that. If that's the case, then we have to cover that separately, and we can talk about that. Just let me know if there's anything specific you want to see during the dash, but for now this is perfectly fine. Of course it is the same for the backward dash, start attack transition, and then returning from the commands to idle, also the same as the other ones. I make it automatic rule based, because basically once the animation is done we can return to idle for both 7 and 8. And then the start transition event is end command transition. An end command transition. So end command transition, the reason this is different is because once a command is finished, then we reset the input buffer and the matches that it found within the command buffer. That way we're not continuously performing different commands that we once pressed now that we've finished all of our commands. And we've actually played the animations. So pretty simple stuff. This is pretty much the same way we do it for all of these. But there are a few different things we're going to do here. So let's go over the animation real quick. So I have a mutant forward dash and a mutant backward dash. Now, like I said, there's several ways you can handle this. So one way you can handle this is to go into your animation. It'll look like this initially. And you can do enable root motion. Now if I enable root motion, and I play my game, and I should have picked the second character, but it's fine. Have it defaulting to the mutant for easy access here. Now, if I dash forward, this is just off the root motion. So it looks good, it performs as we expect. I just happen to have an animation that doesn't have a ton of root motion, because that's the best animation I could get for this. If you're making your own animations, or you find a better one, or make a better one, then feel free to just use the root motion. It'll probably be cleaner than, you know, applying forces to your character, because it's pretty simple, very simple to do once you have the animation, and very clean. It'll look like it's supposed to. So you can do that for both your forward and backward dash, and that'll work. If you don't have enough root motion, like I didn't think I did, and I wanted to be able to modify it without having to change the animation, then you can do something called force root lock, which I've covered a little bit before, but basically it will try to keep your character in the same spot that they are. So if they have movement during the animation, but you're not enabling root motion, it'll look like this, where there's this offset, and then when you go to the animation after it, it'll reset back to the initial position. So the character's not really moving with the animation, and it looks ugly. If you force root lock, it will keep him in place. So it plays the animation, but it basically will try to play the animation where the character actually is in the game. It can be a little bit buggy, but it's mainly only buggy with vertical movement. So if you have horizontal movement only, you should be okay. Otherwise, you may need to look at your animation and either adjust it or find a different animation to work with this. If you force root lock, then it'll stay in place, so then we can apply forces to it. And it's the same way with the backward dash. So I can disable force root lock, you can see the motion, and I can enable root motion, and it will work perfectly fine. But I didn't think it gave me enough distance, and the one I'm doing now is modifiable, so even if it doesn't give me a ton of distance right now, I can actually end up changing it, and then make it look and feel how I want. So say we don't want to go the root motion route, then what do we need? We need to launch the character yet again. Technically, we just have to apply forces. I prefer calling launch character whenever I can because it's a pretty well optimized function, and also it gives us the ability to override the other forces, which is very useful. So, I have an apply forward dash, an apply backward dash, and a notify. Now, I'm actually putting these on the states themselves. I haven't done this very much, so let me explain. We already have our transition events for when we're going from idle to the command, like the forward dash, backward dash. But something we don't really have is anim notifies on these states. So they're the same thing, basically. You just put in a name here, and it will give you it'll give you an event for when this happens. When we enter the state, leave the state, or fully blend into the state. Now, if you try and do an event on entered state, and you have some, I hate to call it weird logic, but let's say complex logic like we have, where we have to like go through, and then when the logic is done, we have to reset all of our commands. You know, it's complicated. If you do that, then these can sometimes give you some issues, because you might actually go into the command, and then it'll try and go back into it, but it knows it's not set to loop, so then it'll try to reset. And thus it'll actually hit the entered state event twice. It doesn't really hurt anything unless you have an event there. But to counter this, you can just do it on fully blended state events. So basically, when we're fully into this event, not when we just go into it for a frame and decide, oh no, this isn't the right animation, and leave. If you put things in the fully blended state event, it will wait until the animation is completely... until we're set in that animation, which should only ever happen once unless we have it looping. And I've turned my looping animation off for both my forward and backward dash. So on my forward dash, I have an apply forward dash that I've typed in here. Once you type it in here, it will become available in the event graph. So do the same for the backward dash, apply backward dash. Okay. Then go into your event graph and type in these names. So apply forward dash, and you want the event. It will bring up this, and you can do the same with backward dash. Now the logic we're going to be doing here is the exact same. We're just going to adjust it based on the direction. So basically, we need to know what direction we're facing, and we need to just launch the character in the appropriate direction, giving the appropriate input. So this is a forward dash. In a forward dash, we want to launch the character these two directions based on if we're flipped or not. Now this could be a little bit confusing because for different people watching the series, myself included, it's been is flipped has been different depending on, you know, what context we're talking about it. So to keep it not confusing, let's just assume is flipped actually means that they're facing right. I know is flipped, again, is kind of ambiguous, so I'm going to probably change it to be is facing right or is facing left, but forget the direction for now. It makes no difference. What matters is that is flipped will determine if we're facing left or right. Whether you know that or not, just reverse the values, and then if your character's going the wrong way when you forward dash, then you know you just have to reverse them again. You know, you just have to change which one you put in where. So basically, am I flipped? If I am, then launch the character. We only want to launch them on the Y. Since this is a forward dash or a backward dash, we don't need to launch them up at all, and we don't need to launch them into the foreground or background. So we only need to use the Y. And for the launch velocity, I actually give the forward dash distance. Now, the distance isn't really the correct word here. Again, it is the launch velocity that we're giving it, but you'll see how we can change this in a data table down the line. Won't go over it now because it's a bit out of the scope of what we're doing for this episode, but we have this variable, forward dash distance, and we're going to pass it into our launch velocity y, and we're going to multiply it by -1. So drag off your character, get your forward dash distance, then drag off of this and do times, and you can do int by float, but I do float by float, and then for the other float I put -1 to reverse this value. So my forward dash distance on my mutant is 800 units. If it's 800 units and I multiply it by -1, it becomes -800. So if it is flipped, we add 800 to the launch velocity y of the character. If we are not flipped, then we add -800 to the launch velocity y of the character. Okay? Because of that, we can go 2 different directions when just applying forward dash, which is good. We need to be able to go toward the opponent regardless of the direction we're facing, which means this is the way we need to handle the logic. I also make sure XY override is checked here. It's technically not necessary. It will work without it, but the XY override basically means that there's no velocity on the character X and Y. That this will just completely override it and ignore it instead of adding to it. And that's what we want in terms of the dash. So the only time you'll probably not want that is, you know, you'll want to cancel that if you cancel into an attack, or you might want to, if the character gets hit while they're dashing, cancel that. But again, you can always XY override and, you know, basically cancel any of the velocity that's there. So I figure do this, and I'll show you some better ways to counter that when we get into transition interrupts, which will probably be pretty soon. Now, luckily, the apply backward dash is the exact same code. You can actually copy and paste it down below. And the only difference here is that we use backward dash distance instead of forward dash distance. And the values are kind of reversed. I mean, again, you do it however you want. But if you just copy it, you'll actually see that the top one for if you're flipped for being backwards, of course, it's no longer the direction we want. Because if we use the backward dash distance, it's a positive 400. Up top here, we use the positive 800. So really, you'd be doing a minor forward dash. So if you want to go backward, well, the top one has to then be you multiplying it by -1, and the bottom one has to be you just adding it to the launch character here. You see that? Let's try and show them side by side. Okay? So just reverse the values. You'll know very easily if you got the direction wrong, because your character will dash the wrong way. You try and do forward dash, and he dashes backward. And there you go, guys. That's pretty much all you need to know to be able to dash. That'll cover it for you. And you can get into more complex dashes, you know, like I said, command dashes, or you can configure the dash logic as much as you want. But that's really all there is to a dash at its core. It's just moving the character to a specified point, specified distance, or a specified speed, and making sure it works for both directions. You can see both characters can use it. And there you go. So guys, I hope that helped you dash and learn what you wanted to about dashing in fighting games. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for continuing to show support to the series and encouraging me to go further. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. We've got a good community who's willing to help with any issues you've got regarding the tutorial series, so feel free to join and we'll get you sorted out. Lastly, guys, if you want to come see some programming live streams, I'm making a side scroller live every Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so feel free to come hang out with me and check it out, ask me questions in live time. It's a fun little experience. They are also archived, so I can post it here in the iCard if you want to catch up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.